This is Byzantium, that is the remnant of what remained of the mighty Roman Empire, and my goal will be to restore over 200 years the power and glory of the Eastern Empire. This will be a daunting task, because in the year 1337 it is a poor country, ravaged by internal conflicts, and central authority is very weak. And what is worse, a new Turkish power is emerging in the region, which in any case poses a smaller threat than mighty Naples or Egypt. Yes, this will be one of those campaigns. Greetings Imperialists, Lookas here, who as usual has the best promotions for you on ENEBA, the trusted partner of this channel. New Year sales are currently underway. You can find information about the latest promotions in the description of this video. For them to work, you must use my link. I wholeheartedly recommend it, Lookas. Okay, I admit it, Byzantium can be overwhelming at the start because there are many things to deal with, many bad things, and it will get even worse. Because as soon as you unpause and the first month passes, bang! The Turkish crisis, -20 stability, the Byzantine ruler dies and you get a regency. But worse still, two crises can become active. And this one, the Byzantine succession crisis, is really severe. Because it reduces estate satisfaction by 15%, and the lower the satisfaction, the lower the maximum taxes before the estates start to rebel. And 100% at some point a rebellion will occur, which will engulf a large part of your country. I spent a good few hours looking for a good start for Byzantium, and I will tell you honestly, the answer lies in the requirements of this crisis. So I'm going back to the start of the playthrough and will now deal with everything step by step. And I have one more comment regarding the tactic I'll present to you in this video. On my Polish channel I was accused of stealing this tactic from this video, which was released on January 3rd, 2026. This is not true. I proved this by the fact that I uploaded the film to my Polish channel on December 31st, 2025, which can be seen in the film frame. In reality, I recorded it before Christmas. Apparently, great minds think alike, but you'll still find many differences. Rivals! I choose countries that are as far away as possible and will not bother me too much, so Morocco, Tunis, Bohemia, Austria are good choices. At least for now. Research without any additional philosophy, I select everything until the moment I get additional RGOs, and then faster institution growth. Now the first loan. So overall I already have two, and I enact a law that bans trade in silver and gold and increases minting of my own coin, which I immediately set to a level of 0 inflation growth. I will zero out food spending and push court spending to the maximum. Yes, this will hurt, and it will hurt my budget a lot, but legitimacy must rise as quickly as possible above 90 points. And I slightly increase diplomatic spending. Trade, as usual, I automate. The fleet will not be used for the next few years, so I mothball it, but I do not delete it because it will be needed. From the army I remove the infantry because it is useless at this point in this game, whereas cavalry is the equivalent of roughly about 600 levies. I also grant one additional privilege to the peasantry for common militia because it will increase both the quality of levies and their number. As for the court and the actions it should take here, let us first set what my advisors are supposed to do, which is basically increasing diplomatic reputation, increasing legitimacy and stability, and accelerating the adoption of decentralization values. Decentralization is a key value for Byzantium because it will improve the satisfaction of social estates, but more importantly, it will make my vassals much more loyal, and I will have quite a few of them. From what I have seen in other guides, most people release 2 or 3 additional vassals, and that, however, is a mistake. A historical one from Lower Macedonia, a custom one from Upper one, then something in Athens, and basically that is it. I, however, have as many as 18 vassals. Half of them are vassals, half are fiefdoms. Currently, fiefdoms differ from vassals in that they are simply more loyal. Overall, I released so many vassals for several reasons. It immediately increased my crown power by 5%, allowed me to reduce expenses, mainly because I have a lower base tax, and many costs depend on it. Thanks to this, I will introduce such legitimacy much faster and cheaper. Another reason is that you can see that now control in my vassals' lands is very high compared to when these provinces were under my direct control. Admittedly, my Byzantium can now raise half as many levies, but in reality I will have far more from my vassals, around 18,000. But the most important reason is that the succession crisis in Byzantium will no longer occur, because I have no more than 2 provinces. And I kept the 2 that are the most populous and in which I have the greatest control. And no, keeping the gold location would give me nothing at this moment. We will recover it in about 10 to 15 years. So yes, basically I had to shrink significantly in order to be able to grow significantly in a moment. Before I unpause and begin my path of expansion, I need to take care of a few things. First, assigning members to the cabinet. Here I am not focusing on family connections, but on them fulfilling their roles as well as possible. All I care about is having more than 25% crown power, everything else is a bonus. But if any of the advisors happen to be from my family, I of course hire them as well. Additionally, I appoint my cousin as the military commander. Now I can unpause. Byzantium immediately becomes a great power, which is actually bad. The Turkish threat has also grown. Unfortunately, there is nothing I can do about it, and I immediately get -20 stability. But more importantly, look, there is only one crisis. And now the coming years will focus on two actions: strengthening the legitimacy to 95 points, because thanks to that I will be able to revoke very troublesome privileges that Byzantium has, which reduce taxes. Yes, this tax reduction privilege exists for all estates. And what is worst is that I am collecting low taxes from both peasants and burghers. And the second thing is simply smashing the Ottoman Empire. Because as we know, when you have problems at home, you look for an enemy abroad. That is why I sent my spies to build spy networks, not only in Turkey, but also in Bulgaria and Serbia. During this time, I also came to the conclusion that it is not worth educating the heir to the throne, because he is an idiot. A short while later, my ruler died, and unfortunately he always leaves this world quickly, which starts a regency period. And that unfortunately slows down the increase of legitimacy. The only buildings I am currently constructing are RGOs, and ideally it would be good if those RGOs also produced food, because food reserves in Byzantium are not very large and this can be your biggest expense. Fortunately, wool provides both money and food. Yes, I am building RGOs because peasants work there, and only from peasants can I collect taxes. Well, okay, possibly also from workers. Oh no, an earthquake. An earthquake in Constantinople, and I cannot afford to rebuild it. I would essentially exhaust my entire loan limit. What I can do, however, is restore prosperity as quickly as possible through cabinet actions. The legitimacy is increasing, I also have decent income, so it is time to declare war on someone. Especially since I have a parliamentary action available right now, I will use it mainly to obtain a territorial claim on this location, Kokeli, in order to conquer it from the Ottoman Empire. And yes, I agree that territorial claim would be much better because I could conquer even more. But gaining 20 points of spy network will take me a bit of time. And then the claim itself takes about a year to be fabricated. In the meantime, the Turks would have done a speedrun of unifying Anatolia before it was even fashionable. Admittedly, after that they would not do much, but the Ottomans would become a tougher opponent. And for more than just one war. At this moment I still have the advantage, which I further increase with a parliamentary action that boosts levies by 50% for 3 years. And yes, I will not ultimately manage to secure support for this issue in parliament, which will give me -7 stability, but I am prepared for that. Now let one more month pass so that everything recalculates and I declare war on the Ottomans, where I personally have a large advantage in levies. It is just that mine are much worse because of that privilege for the nobility, but the troops of my vassals will also join in. And those troops no longer have penalties to quality. Besides, if you had a problem, you could further improve your vassals' armies with the option of sending officers as well as military aid. The officers alone increase their army morale by 10%. However, at present, Byzantium has such a numerical advantage that it is probably not worth it. I keep the alliance with Trebizond in case something goes wrong, then I will call that country into the war. But for the moment, I will probably not need it. I call the fleet back into active service and reduce the game speed, because the Turkish army can really hit hard. Since I will be relying mainly on the strength of my vassals, it is worth going into diplomatic options and managing them, and ordering all my vassals to attach to the main army. As soon as my vassals' troops are raised, they will start attaching to my army as long as I check this option. Otherwise, they will do whatever they want, and most likely die stupidly in a series of minor battles. Which is exactly what the Ottoman army did shortly afterwards, as you can see right now. Even twice, 3 times. Let us say that I set a trap around their fortresses and nobody noticed anything. I also raised the fleet to make it larger. Here the rule is basically very similar to EU4. When the opponent sees that you have a larger fleet, they avoid battle. With my army, my first move is towards the fortress in Izmit. It has to fall. It essentially blocks me from further conquests. And my fleet will help me in its fall by blockading the ports. During the war with the Ottomans, a new, very promising general appeared. I also crossed 50 points of legitimacy, so the chance of a coup ceased to exist. And that is very good, because now I can see that my vassals decided to weaken me in this war and are losing battle after battle to the Ottomans. And I am just standing there besieging fortresses. The siege ended successfully after 411 days. Now all that remains is to find the entire Ottoman army, which is somewhere around here, right? Great. and now we have to fight it in a battle that will certainly end in my great victory. Correct. And the Ottomans are screwed when there is a pile of Byzantines. Simply, after another battle, the Ottoman Empire no longer has an army, only the vassal armies remain, which are no longer that formidable, so I move on to besieging the Turkish capital, and I simply let the rest of my vassals go. Let them choose their own battles. In practice, the war has already ended in my victory, but it must continue until I reach 80 points of legitimacy, because I do not want this crisis to appear, and 80 points are required for it. And after this war, I will no longer have only 2 provinces. In the meantime, the Renaissance has arrived, so I have to choose a path for Byzantium. I will not hide that for what I am planning, military developments and all those levy bonuses would be very useful to me. But if you like the episode, maybe there will be a second episode from Rome. Unfortunately, I must admit that most of the bonuses that are here are useless, up until around the 3rd era. Basically only cavalry would be useful. For me, I am facing a very difficult choice whether to pick administrative or diplomatic ideas, both are really very strong. However, I will want to use the Deus Vult Casus Belli very often, so I will go down that path. And that percentage of loans might also come in handy, I have that feeling. While waiting for the fall of the Ottoman capital, my regent decided that this is the perfect moment to reform the country and significantly weaken the influence of the social estates on central authority. Which I personally think is worth doing, but as usual it costs money, which I do not have much of. After 3 years of siege, the Ottoman capital fell. At that very moment I reached 90 points of legitimacy, so I was able to conquer the entire Ottoman Empire at once. Plus, I took as much money as possible. And since I conquered the entire country, I inherited all of its vassals for free. I just do not know why Rise of the Turks still exists. There are no Turks anymore. It would actually be nice if this event changed from the rise of the Turks to the emergence of the Phoenix. But from what I can see, the Karamanids are now in the lead. Those locations that were not my course, I handed over to new vassals. After neutralizing the threat from the Turks, the moment came to reach for my old territories. Some of them are in Bulgaria, some in Serbia, but of course the most territories are held by those small states in Anatolia. Most of these lands I will now want to reclaim. Wars of unification, I start with Bulgaria because it is the easiest target, and of course using that casus belli. Oh, my research queue has just cleared, so it is time to choose something from the Renaissance. The most important thing for me is definitely vassal loyalty, which then leads me to increasing literacy among the nobility, reducing the cost of annexing a vassal and unlocking the peasant levy. Then I will increase the maximum literacy among the clergy as well as the burghers, because that will speed up all scientific research. Alright, back to the wars with the Bulgarians. The most important thing is to destroy their armies, and my vassals handle that perfectly. And that without my help. And the war with Bulgaria itself is supposed to be quick. Here, what really matters is money, war reparations, and taking 2 of the 3 provinces that I could seize from them. In that one, there is simply silver, and by leaving that 3rd province, I can use the casus belli for cheaper conquest in the future. War reparations from Bulgaria will overall sponsor positive stability for me, even the maximum. Literally, it is not that expensive. And then I immediately attack the Serbs. Yes, there are more opponents here, but they will do nothing, because they will have no passage. Unless they create that passage, but usually they do not. The war with Serbia is one of the more difficult ones. I do not know, their armies are incredibly tough, which is why for now I keep my entire army together. And unfortunately, Serbia also has many well-positioned forts, so at the very least I had to capture the capital. I also have to admit that Byzantium has a lot of events that change the direction of actions toward naval or land focus. Or I am just that lucky, because this must already be the 4th such event. But there it is, I finally managed to get positive stability, and it coincided with another parliament. Unfortunately, I do not have the option here to take an action that increases crown power, which would allow me to revoke privileges more cheaply. But regardless, the increase in stability will be useful, as will population growth. I will support serfdom, because I will be relying on it anyway. Now I move on to revoking the first privilege. And it will be the one that reduces taxes for peasants, because in short it will give me the most money. Sure, it hurts because it cost me 20 stability points, but it is worth it anyway. And now the peasants can truly work for the glory of the empire. And I even end up in the black. And during that same parliament I requested additional levies, and right afterward I conquer a province from the Serbs. But more importantly, I take war reparations as well as money. In the meantime, my spies were already preparing further territorial claims. But, unfortunately, my war plans are disrupted by news of the Black Death. all the worse for Byzantium because normally it is very close and can appear on my territory in as little as half a year. I make sure that I have a hospital in the capital, and fortunately it is already there. But regardless, I still have to take a few loans to build the hospitals in my vassal cities. Fortunately, I am missing only 2 hospitals. I extend my Queen's Regency at the perfect moment because I happen to have an event that increases legitimacy. And overall, my situation is much better than I expected, so I restore trade. The faster I get through this Black Death, the better for me. And look how quickly it spreads, it is impossible to stop. A good practice is also to disband the regular army you have, because you will lose it all anyway. This way I will at least save some manpower for later war, and the fleet simply has to sail out into the open sea. If you have a good ruler, I will honestly say that I have never had a king die from any plague when he is an admiral of a fleet that has sailed out into the open sea. I do not know if this is a rule, but it can be a nice trick. And unfortunately, the Black Death has arrived in Byzantium, and to be honest, this time I will not hide the court from the plague. True, I am risking the death of the regent, but there is also a chance that the heir to the throne, who is an idiot, will die. The only option I choose is the segregation of the infected, for 2 reasons. First, it increases resistance by 15%, which combines perfectly with the hospital, and second, it increases the national value of communalism by 20 points, and I am introducing it in my country right now. Communalism will be useful so that I can cheaply revoke troublesome privileges from the estates, and the social estates will also be more satisfied. After all, I still have a few of those very expensive and troublesome privileges. After arriving in Constantinople, the Black Death no longer spreads so quickly. After 3 months, only 26 people have died. Therefore, in Anatolia, I will declare a quick war in order to take advantage of the fact that I still have additional levies. Of course, I am an experienced player. You had better not do this, because if armies become infected, they can even double your losses as a result of the Black Death. I am aware that this war will be really very fast, because there are simply no forts on the territory of these countries, which will allow me to occupy their territory quickly and not suffer heavy losses. I will generally avoid battles, and in reality, less than 6 months later, I have conquered all the territories I cared about. That is, all the national provinces of Byzantium, because I will not have to hand them over to my vassals. Yes! I could have conquered this country as well and made it my vassal, but then I would have exceeded 50 points of antagonism with the Mamluk, and at present it is a very dangerous country. I simply want to attack it at the right moment, especially since I still have one more country left to conquer that has national provinces of Byzantium. Although before Byzantium there is already another tragedy. The heir to the throne has come of age, and I must do everything to ensure that he takes power as late as possible, because he is truly an idiot. And in fact, my Byzantium is now entering a kind of 20-year period of dealing with the consequences of the plague, which is still ongoing. It has now fortunately reached Egypt as well. But bubonic plague reached me from Egypt? Double kill. This game really likes to make things harder. Alright then, it is time to start rebuilding even though the plagues are still ongoing. First of all, I begin integrating my most important vassals, for example the one with gold. Meanwhile, with my vassals in Anatolia, I change their religion to Orthodox and their primary culture to Greek. Of course, I do this using the actions available for your vassals. This will greatly increase their desire for independence, and if you cannot perform both of these actions at once, then start with religion. Usually the AI changes it first because it is easier, but regardless, I will be integrating these Anatolian countries last anyway, so their independence desires will have time to subside. And it is also funny that in the case of these vassals, you do not actually have to wait for them to integrate the locations they have, because most of their population is already simply of the Orthodox religion or Greek culture. And sometimes these countries will even change their religion and primary culture on their own. The plagues have passed. And I will say this. They took a serious toll, because over 600,000 citizens died, of which 560,000 were from the Black Death alone. In the meantime, the level of peasant taxation in my country rose to almost 60%. This gives me a gigantic income compared to what it was at the beginning. Shortly thereafter, I accumulated 30 stability points and the time came to revoke another privilege, this time from the burghers. Before that, however, I did everything to reduce the cost of revoking it. Yes, during Parliament I unfortunately did not get lucky with the additional 50% crown power. But anyway, the most important thing is the communalism bonus. And after withdrawing this unfavorable privilege, I immediately grant several others, and only from this point do I begin constructing any urban buildings at all, because now they will actually bring me greater profit. And for the next few years, I will probably build them exclusively in the capital. because here I have maximum control as well as maximum access to the market, which, as I hope you know, affects the productivity of these buildings. I would of course start with the buildings that provide the greatest benefits, but I would not build the maximum number right away. Instead, I would do it in such a way as to maintain a slight overproduction in my cities. Otherwise, you can realistically start reducing your income instead of increasing it. I would also approach construction in such a way that I would exhaust the maximum number of burghers in Constantinople. And in the meantime, while that pool slowly regenerates, I would simply build RGOs in my surrounding locations, or also worker buildings, because those can be profitable as well. On rural territories, however, I would not forget to build trade villages, because they increase market access and have many other things they can produce and profit from. This is also the fastest way to make peasants start generating income, because as long as they are not working in any building, the profit from them is practically zero. And thanks to this strategy, my income skyrocketed dramatically after another 20 years, but let us not get ahead of ourselves. Because then, less than 2 years later, I continued my conquests in Anatolia, capturing practically the last provinces to which I had national claims. Alright, maybe except for Rhodes. That one I will also conquer in the meantime. I will keep the coastal locations for myself. There are a lot of ports here that can be developed and thus spread control. And the central locations I will hand over to my subsequent vassals. From time to time I will also wage recreational wars with Bulgaria and Serbia, but not for conquest, only for war reparations. And money. After all, I have to develop my gold mines with something. I will also add that only now did I notice that I have a social estate, which is the tribesmen. And it is now one of the more important estates, because it gives monthly prosperity, which is always worth accepting. After these wars, the money I earn I always spend first and foremost on expanding RGOs. Yes, because that way I will further increase my income from peasants. During the next parliament I have an ideal situation, because I will be able to build roads more cheaply, which also suits me well. But in reality, I do not want to build many roads, only from Thessaloniki to my gold mine. Maybe also here to the diamonds. For now, of course, it shows me that proximity goes by sea route, but it seems to me that the moment I build a road here, then because there is a better port here, proximity should go to Thessaloniki and only from there to my gold mine, and that is funny, it went completely around instead. The next step will also be to slowly increase naval presence in the Aegean Sea, although I will not do much with it yet because I am lacking sailors. And Mediterranean galleys would also be useful, because they are simply more efficient. The problem with sailors will be solved by docks, and protected ports will help with naval presence. So for a maritime Byzantium, these are in fact 3 key technologies. In the meantime, I return to improving relations with all my vassals in the Balkans, especially those who lie on the shores of the Aegean Sea. Here I simply want to integrate these vassals over the next 15, 20, maybe 30 years. This will be a period without conquest, because my antagonism is still quite high. All the more so, I will want to refrain from wars, because power in the country has been taken over by Basileus Idiot I. Unfortunately, the regent died of old age. Although his rule has one positive feature, literally a personality trait. He is an architectural visionary, thanks to which the development of the capital where he resides has accelerated significantly. At this moment, this is also how the values in my country look. I have to be very careful with serfdom, because I barely have a tilt toward it. At this point, I increase serfdom only through events or actions in parliament. The next value that I will now be introducing in my country, however, is innovation. Innovativeness is a very important value, because first of all, it increases literacy, which effectively affects the pace of research. But even better, it increases cultural influence, which accelerates the pace of annexing vassals or changing culture in the country. And in general, the following years passed with these actions. During this time, I fought really many wars with these countries and took mainly money from them, and that was basically until the introduction of the first institution, which was the military institution. The first technology that I have to research is armories, and after that, we always want to have cavalry and also artillery. In this era, it is also worth researching upgrades to levies, such as better cavalry or better peasant infantry, but from the third era of this technology onward I would not research them, unless of course they are on the path to something you need. Then there is a very special technology here that accelerates the research speed for Byzantium. It also has to be invented as soon as possible. Maximum literacy across the entire country. And finally, the casus belli that I will rely on heavily. I mean, it is not the end, but these are the most important researches that I need. And after inventing armories, the whole fun of building a professional army begins. starting with building the maximum number of armories, preferably in the capital. Although at this point I already have several other locations where it will be worth building armories, such as Nicomedia, for a very simple reason. The greater the control, the more manpower these buildings will provide without losses. Oh no, my idiot ruler has died. I am truly saddened by this. His awesome wife has ascended the throne. The heir to the throne will most likely be a very good ruler, if he lives long enough. The year 1388 marks the full flourishing of my capital. Almost 1/3 of the entire Byzantine tax base is now in Constantinople. And thanks to all these actions and the strategy I adopted, I am at this very moment exceeding an income of 100 gold. However, I am now slowly beginning to specialize the capital. I expand only those buildings that are already present here, meanwhile I move the production of other goods to other cities with high control. For example, in Kokeli, I will have furniture production, because the main input for their production is wood, which exists within this province and in fact even within this very location, which has a strong impact on production efficiency, which can be seen here as well. Then I will also build a large number of urban markets to increase market access. And when burghers grow in these cities, I still build a lot of RGOs or worker buildings, because my greatest income still comes from peasants and from minting my own coin as a secondary source. An income of 100 gold is a breakthrough moment for every country I play. Now I will make sure that in each of my provinces there is at least a town, and in each of these towns I will build the maximum number of granaries, because these will very favorably affect the population growth, and preferably in such coastal locations that have the highest bonus to harbor capacity. Because once docks are built and we also construct all other buildings that increase this capacity, from this type of location inland I will build a network of roads. Because look at how proximity spreads. It goes by sea route directly to this port, and then further inland it will spread from this location through a network of roads. In the meantime, I made sure that docks appeared in all my coastal cities and towns. Because once these buildings are completed, I will be able to have more sailors, and this will allow me to create a fleet that will be necessary in wars with the Mamluks. However, before that, I will take care of something else. At last, the time has come to lay the foundations of a professional army, because I already have the manpower. First of all, I recruit howitzer batteries, initially in the number of 20, then I will expand to 40. These batteries I will attach to each of my armies composed of levies. At this point, there will be 2 or 3 such armies. Thanks to this, each army will besiege fortresses faster. For fighting battles, on the other hand, I recruit 30 regiments of cavalry, still the basic Byzantine type. These 1500 cavalrymen will defeat even 30,000 levies. Yes, cavalry is very strong in this game, and this cavalry will mainly be useful when I wage wars with the Mamluks in about 20 years. But for now, my first step in using this new army is an invasion of the rest of the Balkans. In the Balkans, there are simply many small countries that can usually be conquered in a single war. The antagonism generated here will also be mainly toward Christian countries. So when I later turn to Egypt, this antagonism will no longer matter that much. So this time, in the wars with Serbia and Bulgaria, I take their territory or make them my vassals. And the best part is that these wars will actually be fairly even. And great, I managed to make Serbia my vassal, which will not be appreciated by all the surrounding countries. As for Bulgaria, I appreciate that I added 20 cannons, because thanks to that I have the maximum siege bonus. As a result, sieges no longer last for 100 days, but around 140. Bulgaria was too large to make it a vassal, so I reduced its territory somewhat. My power has grown to such an extent that Naples has ceased to be a major threat to me. And now my goal is to take over Naples' Balkan vassals, even though this means a war with Hungary. The worst thing about Hungary was that they did have quite a lot of fortresses. Never mind, it turned out that their defensive line was porous and I captured the capital very quickly, which allowed me to conclude a very favorable peace. And from Naples I took only the Greek vassal. And a few years later I conquered and vassalized the Bulgarians. At this point I have only a dozen or so small principalities left to conquer in the Balkans. And best of all, most of these principalities formed a coalition against me, which will allow me to conquer them all at once. After that, I also fought wars with Naples and Venice for 5 years to reclaim the remaining territories. At the same time, I secured a foothold in Italy as well as in Tunisia for further conquests. I also captured Cyprus, which is very important from a strategic point of view, because it will allow me to effectively supply my armies with food along practically the entire coast of the Levant. However, before that, I still had to prepare a base for the invasion. A professional army and a fleet are quite significant expenses, and in reality I want to double their numbers before I move on Egypt. Therefore, in all of my provinces that matter, I already have at least one town. And the next step is to turn them into cities, which means that I need 30,000 citizens there. So now I will use one of my advisors to encourage migration to these cities, each and every one of them, one by one. This is a good moment, because I am approaching an income of 200 gold, which would allow me to build one city per year. And I still earn the most from peasants. During this time, an event to restore the Hellenistic religion also fired for me. And even though I invited this gentleman to my court, unfortunately nothing more happened for me in this regard. I would really like to have a wiki in EU5 where I could look up the requirements for all events. 20 years later, my Byzantium already had many more actual cities, although I must admit that population dispersion is a very big problem in Byzantium. I also significantly expanded the road network, of course from ports inland, which definitely allowed me to improve control over most of my territory, which even translated into a considerable amount of crown power, despite the fact that my dynasty is currently really quite small. An awful lot of girls are being born to me. And okay, they sit in the cabinet as my advisors, but I am lacking military commanders and admirals because in total, I literally have only one male heir. I also took over most of my fiefdoms and vassals in order to free up some diplomatic relations before further conquests. I have also decided to delay those somewhat because I also need to expand the cities I have just founded. Because once the conquests begin, I will be waging war after war, and only now do I also have enough stability to get rid of the last remaining negative privilege, this time for the nobility. I dealt with the clergy earlier on. The best way to expand the economy now is to add more universities. Of course, universities will also increase literacy, which will affect research speed. But even better, universities require large amounts of paper, books and glass. So as soon as I build a few universities, I will then build several buildings producing these goods. Then universities again, then those buildings again, and then basic materials, for example, those needed for paper production. And this should significantly increase my income. Then, in the year 1437, the Age of Discovery arrived, and I was faced with the choice of which ideas to adopt for this age. In short, they definitely will not be diplomatic ideas. My choice will be administrative ideas, because many technologies in this group speed up the process of integrating provinces. Faster conversion will also be useful to have a more stable country. A bonus to iron, there is never too much of this resource. And building costs and construction efficiency will allow me to cheaply develop a capitalist economy over the next 100 years. However, if you do not feel confident and would like to strengthen your armies militarily, there are plenty of powerful military developments in this age, especially combat speed. At present, this is probably the most important statistic because it allows your army to arrive on the battlefield faster than the enemy, letting you attack their baggage trains and rout them more quickly. Bonuses to heavy ships and galleys are basically guaranteed dominance in the Mediterranean. However, I consider the antagonism bonus to be the weakest of those available here. Unless you are generally reducing antagonism from other sources, then it makes sense. I, however, will certainly accumulate around 500 antagonism during the upcoming wars anyway, so 50 less will not save me. Alright, now that my economy is already rolling, I am building even more armories. I can definitely afford it. As I said earlier, I basically want to double my professional army, or maybe even triple it. Only here, exactly as with building universities, when we construct such utility buildings as armories, it is also worth adding buildings that produce their supplies. At the end, before the war, I also build a line of forts so that no one can enter my territory. I make such a line because it really works well. Supposedly the fort system works like in EU4, so I should build every 2 locations. However, when it actually comes to war, the enemy walks through the line of forts however they want. Besides, Egypt is a Sunni country, so every location they occupy is a location that loses population because people will be taken into slavery. And so my preparations lasted until the year 46, which is 4 years earlier than I had planned. Preparations for war with Egypt. At present, I have 2 batteries of 20 guns each. Their purpose will be to support my levies while besieging fortresses in Egyptian territory. I have also prepared 2 armies of modern cavalry, 4,000 each. The purpose of these 2 armies will simply be to fight battles and nothing else. I did not attach artillery to the cavalry because thanks to that they move much faster across the map. In truth, only 4,000 cavalry would be enough for Egypt, but I want to operate in at least 2 places at the same time. Egypt, without vassals, has only 80,000 levies. I myself, without my vassals, can field 71,000. For the war, I will use a parliamentary casus belli, although a religious one would work just as well here. It is worth marking territory as close to our border as possible, so that war score for capturing it starts to grow very quickly. Unfortunately, in the third era, there is no longer a bonus to war score from battles. As for my vassals, to be honest, I do not want them to participate at the beginning of this war. It is better if they stay on their own territory and do nothing. I will only let my vassals off the leash after I destroy Egypt's army. So it is time for war. Initially, I positioned my cavalry along the line of forts and waited for the enemy troops to arrive. The idea was to win battles, because of course cavalry no longer inflicts such heavy losses as before, but whenever an army retreats and then returns, it will suffer attrition losses due to exhaustion. However, if we attack an army that is numerically smaller than the cavalry regiments, then I will destroy that army. In the meantime, I am raising my levy armies, which I gather in the capital together with the artillery and simply split them in half. I assign generals to these armies who have the highest possible administrative skills, because this speeds up the siege process. And immediately the levy armies set off to capture the war goal. As long as my armies consist mostly of levies, there is no point in assaulting fortresses. It is too costly. You simply have to wait until the fortress falls and surrenders. This will change once I develop better infantry in the Age of Discovery. Then I will practically take every fortress by assault. After capturing the war goal, I keep my cavalry in the area, because the AI always tries to retake the war goal, and my next step is to expand the buffer zone so that the war goal is never quickly retaken. Thanks to this, war score will continue to grow and I will successively occupy further fortresses. This is also important because otherwise supply lines for my armies could be cut and then they would start consuming food. And if the food runs out, not only will a large part of my army die, but at the same time I will also receive a significant penalty to statistics during battles. So currently in EU5 you simply have to closely monitor supply lines. Basically, after a year of war I destroyed half of the Egyptian forces as well as those of its allies, although Egypt itself has suffered only about 30,000 losses so far. I barely lost 20,000, and these are mainly levies of my vassals, who for some reason, instead of doing nothing, occasionally try to enter Egyptian territory. Probably so that it does not go too easily for me. Cavalry is so good in battles because, as you can see, it reaches the line so quickly that it inflicts enormous losses on the enemy, although it is much easier to see it here. Already at the beginning of the battle, my cavalry occupies the full width of the battlefield, while on the opposite side there are only individual enemy regiments. Thanks to this, the cavalry inflicts practically 10 times greater losses on the enemy than it itself suffers and ultimately wins the battle. A major downside of a professional army is that replenishing its regiments requires being on one's own or allied territory. Unfortunately, occupation does not count here, so from time to time I have to pull my cavalry units back to my country. A bit later there was a great battle in which the enemy was 10 times more numerous than my cavalry, and I still won that battle without heavy losses. Unfortunately, the more I conquered, the longer my supply lines became, so I had to start using the fleet to deliver food to my armies. You can also create such supply points using manpower resources, but for now this was not necessary. That is precisely why I captured Cyprus, to handle this supply without major problems. One fleet supplies, another replenishes stocks, and they rotate like that continuously. It is also worth paying attention from time to time to the condition of the artillery in the armies used for sieges. If the bonus drops, it is worth pulling such an army back to your own territory so that the artillery batteries can simply be replenished. By also using the tactic of supplying food via the fleet, I do not have to use supply wagons either. They slow the army down significantly. And basically, after 6 years of war, I have 80% war score and can now end it. As a rule, if possible, you should first conquer those locations that have zero control on the enemy side, because then they have a reduced war score cost. I also avoid conquering locations from vassals if possible. So I probably will not take the Nile Delta in this war. So yes, after this war, my territorial gains will not weaken Egypt, and it would also be difficult for me to capture the capital at present. But I think that in the second or third war, I will already reach the capital and show you a certain trick to kill any country. In the first war, I take as many coastal provinces as possible, because this will significantly extend my supply lines in the next war. Unfortunately, Paradox is clever and introduced a modifier that counteracts partitioning a country. Although it works like crap as usual, because for example it also increases it when taking war reparations. So unfortunately I will not use the full war score point capacity, only half of it. So to conclude the first war with Egypt, I take only these territories. And just as I finish the war, I can focus on the research path. First of all, I want to take the bonus to literacy, which will have a positive effect on research points. Then I want to research this as quickly as possible. That is, speeding up the integration of newly conquered locations. Next comes cabinet efficiency, because this will also speed up the integration of newly conquered locations, as well as, of course, all other actions performed by my advisors in the cabinet. After that, within the culture tree, there is access to one of the most powerful technologies in my opinion, because it increases population growth. Okay, 0.02, but over the course of the entire playthrough, it will probably make a difference of millions in population. Once these things are secured, I then move on to researching better units for my army. First of all, light lancers. I do not make heavy ones. Then heavy Byzantine artillery. Thanks to this, I will need fewer cannons in the army to get the maximum bonus to besieging fortresses. And then professional infantry as well, because I will already be assaulting fortresses. Overall, skirmishers will probably be useful too. As I mentioned earlier, in this era I do not research levies, but I think supply convoys may be useful if I end up fighting battles somewhere deep in the desert. After that, I also want to develop everything that increases the logistics range for my armies. After the war, one fleet returns to patrolling the seas and I mothball the transport fleet in Cyprus. It will be useful again soon anyway. Using the period of peace with Egypt, I will also take over the smaller countries remaining in Anatolia. Although for that my vassals will be sufficient, which is why funding for armies and forts goes down. Newly acquired coastal locations, these I want to integrate for myself immediately. I will not release any vassal here. Let my advisors in the cabinet take care of it. After all, I already have a great many of them. With the Mamluk, I effectively have a full 5 years of peace. Therefore, I have already started the process of preparing a new casus belli. I can now also afford to reform the country when it comes to the inheritance system, switching to one of the best systems where I can choose which of my heirs to the throne will rule. Unfortunately, this applies exclusively to male offspring. If, however, I have no sons, then the eldest daughter will take over power. Yes, I was ready to bear those costs in both stability and legitimacy. The second war with Egypt essentially proceeds very similarly to the first one, with one very small difference. Earlier, I conducted a synod. As an Orthodox country, for 75 points of religious influence, I can conduct a synod from time to time. The synod offers quite a lot of options, which are fairly interesting here. But one of the most important ones for me is the one at the very bottom, because it speeds up the integration of newly conquered provinces and, more importantly, reduces the war score cost of provinces with a different religion. A kind of defensive policy. So I will be able to conquer 10% more locations from the Mamluk. However, in this war, this time, I want to literally destroy Egypt, because dealing with those 80,000 levies simply takes too much time. And now look, before ending the war, this is what the spread of proximity across all of Egypt looks like. It is very green here. As a result of the war, however, I cut Egypt's capital off from the rest of the country. This causes proximity to stop spreading in any way and all territories will tend towards zero control points. Before doing this, there were 82,000 levies here and 262 points of base tax. And before the Third War, this is already down to only 167 base tax and just under 40,000 levies. Control simply has not yet had time to fall to zero here. However, beforehand, I release a vassal here because I want to improve relations with the culture of Lower Egypt. I also upgraded my cavalry to light lancers and the artillery to modernized Heliopolis guns. Unfortunately, I still lack modern infantry, so once again I will be relying on levies. Thanks to these changes, the upgraded cavalry carries out an outright massacre, and I currently have 4 armies besieging at the same time, because 10 batteries give me the maximum bonus. However, during the Third War, I realized just how bad a place the desert is. There were 20,000 levies here that ran out of supplies. More precisely, malaria seems to appear in this territory. Armies now have something like disease resistance. And unfortunately, every army has to suffer in order to reach 100% resistance. In the case of levies, however, this resistance is temporary because after every war, the army is disbanded. As a result of the Third War and the fact that these territories now have very low control, I take a great deal of land for myself. I no longer pay attention to antagonism. I generate it in such large amounts anyway that sooner or later a coalition awaits me. Taking the Nile Delta at this point essentially killed Egypt and it is no longer any opponent for me. Of course, I handed over the entire Delta territory to my vassal. I will also soon force him to convert to Orthodoxy. This vassal is now also the largest country that has the culture of Lower Egypt, so I will be able to improve relations with that culture. As soon as I improve relations with him to around 150 points. And ahead of me were the next stages of the expansion of Byzantium. I started by building cathedrals literally everywhere. Previously, I only had them in cities and towns. I also received some kind of bonus for recapturing Jerusalem. The year 1490 was a breakthrough year. First of all, in Constantinople, the construction of second-tier manufactories for both books and paper began. When this process is finished, income in the capital will increase significantly. But even now, Constantinople is one of the richest cities in the world. This can be seen on the base tax map of Europe. Paris was far behind. My army has also grown to such a size that investing became necessary not only in armories, but also in rural conscription. I also expanded the Byzantine fleet because I now have to operate over a much larger basin. I also took over half of the trade from my Egyptian vassal and began building a large number of marketplaces here. Because at this moment, immense riches from India are flowing from the Alexandrian market to Byzantium. I now have access to incense, cloves, and most importantly, pepper. All goods that are lacking on European markets. Soon I will also take Cairo and Damascus, and then I will become a complete monopolist. Further wars with Egypt were already really easy, especially since my vassal fielded 100,000 levies. I already had professional infantry in my armies, so I simply assaulted the forts. Nevertheless, I still had to fight one more fifth war with Egypt, because essentially only their capital remained. And now, when as a result of this war I take it, I will also inherit all of its vassals. They are of course somewhat disloyal because they have high antagonism and low relations with me, but this will improve over time. In the meantime, I also got a bit bored, so I decided to conquer Mesopotamia. And I integrate most of these locations directly without handing them over to vassals. I have quite a lot of advisors in the cabinet, and I also have many bonuses to integration. So the whole process goes very quickly. I am also a cultural hegemon, which is why I have access to a special cabinet action that allows changing culture across an entire region. I built a large number of cathedrals in the territory of the Levant. This is very important because it will speed up the process of automatic conversion of locations. I did nothing, and basically 1/4 of the population here is already Orthodox. In the case of Egypt's core province, because there is a very large population here, I divided these two areas into Upper and Lower Egypt. I will be improving the attitude of both of these cultures towards me. The culture of the Levant has only 1 million population here, so I am changing it to Greek culture. Because the larger the population, the harder it is to change culture. Let's return for a moment to the development of the economy and what it looks like at this point. It is mainly based on the construction of paper and books. This is probably visible from the number of my fully developed locations. Soon I will also invent a better method of paper production, and one of its main ingredients will then be basic cloth. For now, however, these are plant fibers. But in any case, I already need enough basic cloth that I started its production in all my cities and towns. And soon I will need even more of it. So I am already approaching the level at which I will soon begin shifting values toward a capitalist economy. This will allow me to further increase production efficiency as well as move from serfdom to free subjects. I also had to significantly increase my diplomatic expenditures in order to deal with all of my vassals. My main concern was to increase vassal loyalty, and after a while they stopped being angry with me. Nevertheless, I decided to annex most of my minor vassals anyway. After that, I will deal with the Balkan states. I want to delay Anatolia in this process, because I will want to force those countries to at least change religion in the region, since it is an annoying process. Changing culture had a very positive effect on cores in my country. Basically, most provinces are already considered national. In the Levant, there are already several such locations as well. And over time, as the culture here changes from Levantine to Greek, all of these locations will become national for me. A very important technology is the one that adds an additional building slot in cities. I want to construct this building in all of my cities and towns. As a result, I began to have truly gigantic demand for tools, and tools in turn generate gigantic demand for iron, and in order to satisfy this demand, the key technology is the one that increases output by 75%. This technology works both on extraction in RGOs and on the efficiency of those facilities that can convert coal into iron. But there is 1000 gold of pure income. I already have quite a few professional armies, the number of which I will want to triple anyway in the near future. The borders of the Eastern Empire have probably been reached, and ahead of me lies the road to forming the Roman Empire. All in all, I am only about 1/5 of the way there. Let me know, my dear viewer, whether you want such a continuation, preferably by leaving a like and a positive comment. Because I will not hide the fact that I have a certain plan for these conquests, but it will be an extremely unpleasant campaign, so I need encouragement from you in the form of likes and comments. Because wars with France, England, Bohemia and those Hungarians will not be pleasant fun. And of course, I am also still facing the transformation of the economy into a capitalist one, which would actually begin in about 30 years. And if you cannot wait to see how to transform the economy, then here is an episode from the guide in which I show step by step how to carry out this transformation.